Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. It's a good thing podcasts are free, as this one isn't worth a penny. Here are your hosts, Damien Fahy and Andy Leeks.
Now, Damien, before we get on with this week's podcast, you had something quickly to say about our sponsors.
Yeah, we've got a new sponsor, Money Farm, and Money Farm are an online investment advisor and one of the biggest digital wealth management companies in Europe. So a big thank you to them for sponsoring the podcast. Now, Money Farm create portfolios to maximise long-term returns using ETFs to make incredibly cheap portfolios. And you even get the first £10,000 of your portfolio invested without any charge from Money Farm. And if you enter the code MTTM20K into the box when you sign up, you get the first £20,000 of your portfolio invested and run by moneyfarm.com without any charge.
Great stuff. On with this week's show. Hello and welcome to episode 113 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fahy, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing? You feeling festive?
I am feeling festive because this week I attended my daughter's nativity play.
Ah, there we go.
And so you can't help but feel festive when you've watched a nativity play with all the comedy, the unintended comedy that goes on within a nativity play for sort of 5 to 7 year olds, I think was the age range of this particular play. So there's so much almost slapstick comedy going on without it meaning to be intentional. So yeah, brilliant. So I am now feeling more festive than I was. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely the same. I've been fully nativitied out this week because I've also had my daughter who was doing her nativity. They do a couple of different shows, and also my children have been watching the film Nativity on the various sort of streaming devices. We've got Netflix and Amazon Prime, and I think Nativity, the original, is on one of them, and Nativity 3 is on the other one. And so we had to, of course, buy Nativity 2 because that was the one missing from the set. So yeah, a week's worth of Nativity. It's all very it's all a bit much actually.
Oh, good. I'm feeling festive, and so are you. But I suppose we best crack on with the money stuff, hadn't we? Because I've put a lot into the show again. I've crammed it. We're not, just because it's Christmas, we're not taking it easy, Andy. So we've got a lot of money stuff. So your next question is going to be, Damien, what's on the show?
So Damien, I'm glad you brought that up. So what's on the show? Right,
this week we got a couple of giving type themes. We've got a slight Christmas angle to it, but it's actually got a more evergreen feel in terms of investing as gifts for children. So there are a lot of people who want to give gifts to children, but they might want to do something that's going to be longer. So they might actually want to give them something for their future. So grandparents, they're a good example of this. They might want to save or invest some money for their kids. So I'm actually going to talk about that. How can you do it? What are the best things to do? Because it is one of those areas. It's a slightly unusual thing, but there are plenty of people out there, and there's some. It's quite. You don't have to put away a lot of money, so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the cost of financial advice, and given that we're heading towards the end of a year and into a new one, then normally people look at their finances and think, do you know what? I'm going to sort these out once and for all, and that may mean getting help. So it's actually looking at what the cost of advice is, but with a sort of slightly backward looking, because we're going to look at how it's evolved over the last few years so people can actually see what the cost of advice is, how it's changed, and actually in some cases how they're being slightly, quite a bit overcharged. So that's one of them. We've got another bit about gifts. One thing, if you've got presents you've bought, listen out for the tip of something not to do. And the final thing, I don't know why I've crammed 4 in this week, but something to do with pay and about how much you get paid and gender gaps. So I want to talk about that very briefly.
Okay, you're not going to be controversial on that, are you?
No. The point is that there is a gender gap, and so we're going to show people how they can find out what the gender gap is in payments across all sorts of jobs. So we need to shine a light on the gender pay gap that still exists, and I'm going to show people how, and also inadvertently they can actually check whether they're personally man or woman. Are they getting paid a reasonable amount for their role, their job?
Good. Okay, so Christmas investments, Christmas as a gift for relatives and things like that. You mentioned that at the start. Should we do that first?
Yeah, let's go with that, Andy. Right, this story, as many, I seem to start lots of these things A journalist asked me, and this is another one of those stories, a national newspaper journalist asked me, what are the best ways to invest for children as a gift so you can give an investment? Now, we're setting aside the idea of opening savings accounts or anything like that. That's a little bit more tedious and mundane. Some people might actually want to do something that could grow a bit faster than things with a very low interest rate. So I'm going to rattle through them, but they with their pros and cons. And the first one is National Savings and Investments Children's Bonds. So NS&I Children's Bonds. So these are the step up from normal children's savings accounts. So what you can do is you can put in £25 a month up to a total of £3,000, and the children will get 2.5% tax free, which is obviously good, and they're backed by government. Because one of the things, if you're going to do any kind of investing, whether it's saving or investing, these are more towards the end of saving. But if you're going to do something where you're locking your money away for a child, then you want to make sure that the people or the institution that offer it are still going to be around. So NS&I are backed by the government. So you can guarantee that by the time you finish, or your child or grandchild actually has access to these things, that the money will still be there. So the children's bond from SN&I, oh God, I tell you what, I struggle with that one, Andy. NS&I, backed by government, 2.5% tax free. The one negative, I would say, or two really, there's a 5-year term on these things. So if you do want to take one of these out, you're going to have to, they can't get access to it for 5 years. So it does mean you have to get a parent to manage them for you. And they can be opened by parents, guardians, grandparents, or even great-grandparents. So you could open them for your grandchildren if you wanted to. But because of the term that's involved, at some point, somebody's going to have to do something with it at the end of the 5 years. So you're going to have to tell the parents. So it's not quite the surprise, if you get what I mean, if you're given a gift. So it doesn't have to be Christmas. This is all year round I'm talking about. The other one to think about, this is really popular actually. We were fortunate enough that one of my children, one of the grandparents, did this for them, which is premium bonds. And premium bonds, as you may know, are, you can put a minimum of £100 in, and it's a monthly prize draw, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you have a premium bonds, and you get put in a prize pool of everybody else, all the millions and millions of other premium bond holders. And if your numbers come out, then you could win up to £1 million. Now, the way they work is you don't actually earn any money on them. They just stay there. You get entered every month. So ad infinitum. You just keep going. But they quote a return on these things of 1.25% tax free. And the idea is that if you pull together all the winnings of everybody in the UK and put that against the amount of money that's in there, that works out to be 1.25%. So, of course, there are many people who've held these things for 40 years or something, and they've never won anything. Yet there'll be somebody who's had one for a week and may have won £1 million or some of the smaller prizes. So you just don't know. But what they're quite good for and why they're popular is because, again, they're backed by government, so always going to be around. There's no management of them. So if a grandparent or anybody wanted to buy them, then you don't need the parents' input. So you could just go and put £100, put it in the child's name, and it's just left there forever. And they can eventually, when they're older, they can decide to cash it in or whatever. But of course, there's the possibility that they could end up being a millionaire from it. So I always put it into the realm of not a incredibly serious long-term investment, because inflation is going to erode that, isn't it? Because chances are you're not going to make a lot of money, but they could do. It's a bit better than buying a lottery ticket, because they actually have something that stays there forever. Unlike a lottery, you're only in it for 1 week. So that's the next step up we went from savings to children's bond to premium bonds, where you're starting to get towards the element of some more. There's not much risk, but there's actually a little bit more potential upside. Then the next one, there's two more. So hang on, there's two more. Friendly societies. Now, friendly societies are much like building societies, that they're owned by their members, but the real difference is that they've just been around for a hell of a lot longer. Some of these are hundreds of years old. And what they do is they offer a version of like a children's bond, but it's actually got an investment element to it.
Okay.
So there's something like, there's a fund that will invest in, it will have cash, it will have property, it will have bonds, it might have equity, so shares in there. And you don't have to do anything. There's just one fund, and they will call it a with profits fund. And I won't dwell on it, but the way they work is that they, rather than get the return that you would from those assets every year into the investment. They smooth it out, so they keep back some of it. So what's happened in the past, premium with profits funds have had a bit of a bad name because they don't always deliver those great returns. So on the scale of investments, it's a good way of dipping the toe into something that's very managed and the returns are smoothed out, but you're not going to set the world alight or shoot the stars with that kind of investment, but you will probably have a good upside. So this is their now investment, so there is a risk that the return you get back could be less than you put in. Right, so the positive is, okay, they're not backed by government, but these institutions have been around for a long time, so there's an evidence that they will still be around, more than likely, when your children are older, or your grandchildren. Now, you can do this from as little as £10 a month. That's a real positive of them. The downside is that you have to commit to doing it for that 10 years.
Right.
Because they are a 10-year term. So that's quite a long time. And if you stop paying for whatever reason, then they could potentially keep all the money and the child gets nothing. So that's part of the contract. So again, these are the next step up in investing. And ultimately, if you really want to do something where you're gifting money to a child to invest because you don't want them to have it, then those were the first three. The last one, and by far the best, is still going to be a junior ISA. Now, we do a lot on the site about analysing, on moneytothemasses.com, analysing the best junior ISAs out there. So if you just Google the best stocks and shares junior ISAs, you'll find us, or you could just go on the site and look at it. Now, these can only be opened by parents or guardians. So if you're a grandparent or some other family member who wants to put money in one of these, you have to check that one exists, because if they don't exist, then you can't open one for the child that you want to make the gift for. So you're going to have to get the parent involved. Now, again, these are tax-free returns, and you get an amazing investment choice. You get the same investment choice if you had a pension or investments yourself. There's a maximum of £4,080 at the moment a year that can be contributed in total by everyone. So they are the best ways to start investing for children, unless you want to go and start saving. That's to me is the sliding scale when you get into somewhere where you can do start giving them investment risk and build a pot of money for their future. But as if you go back through them, each has their positive and negative. For some people, it will be the fact that they don't have to involve the parents. They might not even get on with the parents. For other people, some of those have low minimums, which is actually more accessible to them than some of the others that require you to put in more money. So have a re-listen to all of that, and then you pick the one that you want.
Good stuff. And you often hear this phrase bandied about gifts that keep on giving. In a weird kind of a way, these are gifts that keep on giving, because there's an investment element to them. So yeah, nice. I like that.
I mean, I like the idea because of that, like you're saying, Andy, that you do get, it's not being ungrateful, but some people, if you've got children, they can get a lot of presents from lots of family members, and sometimes it's quite nice to have that sort of thing going on in the background. And we've had family members, when children are born, for example, want to put money towards something, only a small amount of money towards their future, and I like that idea. So it all works for the same as that. If people want to give gifts, there are ways that they can do, which doesn't have to directly involve the parents as such, but can give them some investment risk. Good, that's it, it's done.
Beautiful. What we got next?
Right, let's go with a very quick piece. It's almost just a point I want to raise to people out there, to do with presents at Christmas, where they hide presents, okay? There is a money-related aspect to this. I don't know about you, Andy, but when I was a kid, I remember going around and hunting for presents. We're at that cusp of whether our daughter believes in Father Christmas or not. And we've always got that little rogue in school who's going around telling people not only where babies come from, but also where that Father Christmas doesn't exist. So we're at that cusp where you definitely have to make sure that you hide the presents in the house, because there might be prying eyes that ruin the whole thing, because obviously she still believes in Father Christmas. So, because he does exist, for anyone out there who's questioning it themselves. But I don't know about you, but we used to always hide. My mum and dad used to hide theirs in the wardrobes. So we used to just go around as kids looking in wardrobes. So you have to come up with ever and ever more inventive places to hide presents. So I don't know where your parents kept them, or where you keep yours for your kids.
Well, you've already mentioned it. Mine were always in the wardrobes, and ours are currently in the wardrobes.
Yeah, but do you know, there's a piece of research that has been carried out, and 72% of people will hide presents in their car. because they think their wife, maybe it'd be a piece of jewelry or something, or a ring or watch. So expensive things, they'll actually hide it in the car so it's not in the house so they can't find it. And the quick point I wanted to make is that that's an incredibly bad idea, because it's very unlikely they're going to be covered by your car insurance if you get broken into. So you have to bear in mind, if you're going to put expensive gifts in there and someone breaks in and steals that gift, it might not be covered on your car insurance, unlikely to be, because normally they have quite low thresholds for value, so sometimes only about £100-200. And of course, it's whether it's been lost outside of your house, whether your house insurance has something that would cover you as well. So just bear that in mind if you're going to put something expensive in the car to hide it from your wife. Oh, before I wrap up that piece, there's something that's always baffled me is pushchairs. I know lots of people put pushchairs and buggies in their car and leave them in the boot. And do you remember a few podcasts ago, quite a while ago now, probably about 6 months, I joked about how the buggy in the back boot of the car was worth more than the car. And we found out when we were trying to get rid of the car, because it's basically falling apart. When the man parted exchange, and he just told me that, yeah, pretty much he'd almost rather have the pushchair out the back. And the pushchair was 7 years old itself, because it was for our first daughter we'd used it. So that just goes to show you that the value of some of the things you put in your car might actually be higher than the excesses and the level of cover on your policy. Right, next piece, Andy, the cost of advice.
Yeah, interesting, this one. Okay, shoot.
Right, what I'm doing with this one is people in the new year or any time might decide they want to sort their finances out and might want to go and see a financial advisor. And one of the biggest things people stops them is the cost of that advice and whether it's worth it. So let's just park with whether it's worth it for now and whether you need to. We're going to just talk about the cost, because if you've already gone and spoken to them, you probably might need to. We're assuming you know you need advice, and the chances are you need advice if you can't do something yourself or don't have the confidence. So how much does it cost? Now, again, there's been some research that's looked at the change in the landscape of how financial advisors charge for advice. And it's very difficult for consumers to know what is the average and what's a good rate and what's not a good rate, because advisors don't really compare. There's no league tables out there. So what's happened is in 2013, I don't know if anyone remembered, but there was something called RDR, Retail Distribution Review. In very, very simple terms, what it did is it stopped financial advisors and fund houses. Well, it actually changed the way they were paid. So in the past, if you bought an investment and it was an investment fund, it would be all bundled up in the cost of about 2.5% would come out of your investment every year, and then that would be divvied up to people. And some of that would go to the investment platform they would use, so that's the mechanism by which they buy the fund. Some would go to the advisor who'd recommended the fund house would keep some. So what it meant is that people didn't really know who was getting paid what, and it just seemed it was very opaque and not very clear. So the FCA quite rightly said, look, we don't like any of this. We wanted to make it very clear, and of course that makes things have to be cost effective and competitive, because once people know exactly what you're charging, they will then say, well, hold on, if you're giving me advice and it's costing me a certain amount every year, well, what am I getting for that? Because before it was just bundled into it, and it was almost part of the deal. Everyone did it. So since then, the idea was that it would almost make it far more transparent. So if you went and bought an investment or went to see an advisor, he may charge you a certain amount up front and an ongoing commission at the back end. So that was typically about 0.5%. So if you had £100,000 investment, then they would charge you £500 would go to the advisor. Other amounts would go to other people, up to a total of maybe between £1,000 and £2,000 maybe. And some of those would go to the fund house and the platform. But it was meant to make it clearer. And of course, the idea was that it was meant to open up financial advice to everyone. Now, people fairly early on saw the problem was that if an advisor has to demonstrate his value, he's going to push up his costs, and it would actually create this thing called an advice gap, which means that ordinary people couldn't afford advice. And that's us, Andy. And that's where Money to the Masses originally came from, actually, because of that gap. I could see it was happening. This was in 2010. It was in the pipeline, and just that idea that most people don't have financial advice. So that's why I started doing this podcast and doing Money to the Masses, which came first, like I said, in 2010. Now, the interesting thing that about this research. What it's found is there are two trends. The cost of financial advice has gone up by 50%, and actually, financial advisors, 1/5 of financial advisors have actually asked clients to leave and they've ditched them because you're not profitable, because you're not big enough. Now, shows you back in 2014, it was deemed that £25,000 was the minimum by which someone would take you seriously as a financial advisor. They would say, if you've got £25,000 and I could do something with you and it's worth my time and money. They might not have said those words, but that's what they would have. That's why their minimum of £25,000 to invest was there. Understandable. Everyone's got to make some money. They're not going to do it for free. Well, 2 years later, so 2016, the minimum now, on average, typically is £100,000. Now, that's a large sum of money for people to have £100,000 for a lot of IFAs to deem it worthwhile to engage with you. Now, of course, there are people who do it for lower sums. I'm not saying they don't exist, but they're harder to find. And just to show you the difference as well, it's not just about the minimums and whether they take you seriously. The costs, like I said, had jumped up, and I'm talking about on the back end. So when you go to a financial advisor, will charge an amount up front, which is normally sort of a fairly hefty sum, and then something on the back end. Now I'm going to just focus on the back end bit at the moment. Like I said, that used to be around 0.5% was his share. Now they looked at the numbers, and actually that's jumped 50%. So therefore, typically now, financial advisors charge 0.75%. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. Because bearing in mind, if you're investing in anything, that means that your starting point, you've got to get at least 1% a year just to stand still. And that's just his cut. If you've got to then pay the fund managers and the platforms and all those people, you're going to have to get 2-3% just to break even. So that's why people go it alone and do DIY investing. And if you're interested in that, then have a look at 80/20 Investor, which is my DIY investment service, where I just teach people how to run their own money. Which has been hugely successful, and we'll talk about more in future podcasts as well. So yeah, just to run through, 24% of financial advisors charge 1% a year, just even if they don't do anything for you. They're meant to give you a service, but some of them hide from it. 28% charge 0.5%, 45% charge 0.75%, and a very small number, 5%, charge over 1% a year. That's a lot of money. Bearing in mind, if you had 100 grand, if they were charging you 1%, that's £1,000 for not even doing anything, even if they didn't get out of bed. They're supposed to do something. That's your job to say, what is it you do? So that is the ballpark you're looking at. I personally wouldn't pay more than 0.5% for a financial advisor. I'd argue it. These are negotiable. They're not set in stone. If they don't want to deal with you, then fine, they'll find someone else. But I wouldn't pay more than that on an ongoing basis, unless they gave me very, very clear list of what I was getting for that in terms of regular reviews, ongoing service, phone calls, all this sort of stuff. And when it comes to upfront fees, then that's quite interesting, because what happened from RDR is advisors used to charge percentage fees. So you would go back to that 100 grand, they might charge 3% up front. So 3 grand, quite a bit of money. Now that's changed. So what they do is they have to charge you an annual fee. And that annual fee, most of them have gone to, is just a reflection of what they were charging up front. So, sorry, not an annual fee, they'd charge you an upfront fee. So that fee would just be, rather than saying I'm charging you 3% of whatever you invest, they'll just say, well, I'm charging you £3,000. So I don't know why the regulators thought that people wouldn't just use that mentality, and nothing's really changed. All that's happened is that financial advice has gotten more expensive, and it's become more selective and elitist. So there's not much you can do about that. The one thing I would say is obviously get a recommendation if you want a financial advisor. You can try and do it yourself. Go on unbiased.co.uk. They have a good means of you shopping around and looking at for financial advisors. They don't show the costs of them, but they show you people near you. You can also find that tool via moneytothemasses.com. If you go on there and just click on find an advisor, it's there, and you can put in your postcode and have a look around. But they say if you have £10,000, this is unbiased, then the net benefit of advice, paying for it, the net benefit of paying for it is actually positive. And I slightly question that. I think it's more. I wouldn't actually pay for advice unless I had at least 50 to 100 grand anyway, because, I mean, that's slightly, I know I talk about money and everything like that, but if I was talking to somebody else, if they really didn't know anything, then yeah, I understand that. then speak to an advisor if you've got less than 50,000. But you'd really have to drive down the costs and be very specific about what they do. So there you go, Andy. That's the bit on cost. The only thing I would say is I think going forward what we'll see is a lot of consolidation and lots of people merging, because if they can't drive their costs down, if they can't make more money from people, they'll have to drive the costs down, and the way they do that is consolidation. And I do think, as a very passing comment, as an industry, I think when they do consolidate, whether it's firms, wealth managers, whatever it is, I'm not sure they actually look at it from the client's point of view, whether it's good. They always look at it from whether it's good from the advisor who's buying the new firm. It's from their point of view in terms of income. But anyway, that's just the last passing point on that one. So advice is expensive. That's how much you should pay. Don't pay over the odds. And if you have a query, you can email me and I'll tell you whether I think it's actually worthwhile or not.
Good. And there's not many other podcasts or money experts that will invite such a thing. Brilliant stuff, Damien. We've got Battle of the Sexes coming up. You're going to be non-controversial by telling the listeners a bit more about it.
Well, yeah, this is, again, like I said, I'm not going to be controversial at all. It's just really shining a light on the fact that women are generally underpaid. There's a pay gap, even though that idea was meant to, by law, was meant to have been removed years and years ago. It still exists, and the average for across industries and across jobs, the average gap between men and women is 18%, 1/8, and that's huge. That's almost a fifth. So a pay gap. I mean, in this day and age, that's disgraceful. Women listening to this podcast will be probably screaming or tutting and saying, oh, finally the men have worked this out, because they've probably known this all along. There are anomalies. There are odd jobs where women do get paid more. For example, I think there was I think the traffic wardens was a bizarre example. But if you want to go and check what the pay gap is on your particular job, you can, because this work was carried out by the Office of National Statistics, which is the governmental official body that they use to do all the economic analysis out there. So if you Google it, the ONS, and you put the pay gap, there was a URL. It's incredibly long. We might link to it in the podcast notes. You can go on there and just select your job, and you can see how it compares to other jobs and what the pay gap is, and it has it for men and women.
Why would the ONS be publishing this? Is this empowering people to challenge it, essentially?
Well, yeah, I think it's to empower it, but they also need to, as governments need to know this information anyway, because if they're making policies, and there's meant to be laws stopping this, because what came out very recently was about the lack of women in top jobs, so CEOs in Footsie 100 companies, and so the idea that this glass ceiling is meant to have been removed is flawed, because it hasn't been, and the only way you can ever find whether it has or whether there's been a change is to go out there and find all the stats, and they've just released it, which I applaud them. I think it's great that you can see all these figures, and if you're a man listening to this, then you should take that on board, especially if you're an employer, because I don't see why men and women don't get paid the same. Like most people out there would agree with that statement. They should be paid the same. But even if you're not interested in this and you're going to bury your head in the sand, what that does actually, if you go to that calculator, it's an interactive tool, you can see what the hourly rate is on average for your job, which as an aside is quite an interesting thing. So if you work in finance or you're a train driver, I actually put train drivers in because obviously they're striking all the time at the moment. I wanted to see how much they earn, and it was over 40 grand a year, £40,000, so way above the national average, probably heading towards almost twice the national average. And there was really no difference between men and women in that role, which was good. They were probably overpaid in my view, especially they don't seem to go to work. Anyway, there we go, Andy. I was controversial at the end.
Yeah, you were. And I mean, it's nice to see that there are quite high-profile things happening in the press in terms of sports and equalising the pay. I think it happened with Wimbledon quite recently in the tennis, and I think that's got to filter down to the general public. So yeah, good to see. Let's hope that gap not only just sort of comes a little closer. Let's hope that gap closes in the next few years. Do you think we'll maybe get to a point in the near future, maybe in our working life, where that gap has completely diminished?
Do you know what, Andy? I as a dad of two daughters, and you're the same.
I am.
You've got two daughters. I'd love to think it will happen in my lifetime. I think it might happen in their lifetime, but I'm not convinced. I'd love to sit there and think it will close a lot quicker. But the problem is the people in power within businesses have predominantly been men. There are more and more women coming through, so it will change eventually. And I think it's fantastic that we've got a female prime minister. I think it's fantastic probably the most important woman in the whole of Europe, which is Angela Merkel, is also obviously a woman. And it's just a shame Donald Trump runs America. Mm-hmm. But in the long run, I think it's
2 steps forward, 1 step back.
we have female role models, so I hope it does. Unfortunately, the only thing is, it has to be driven by men as well. I don't believe, this is my sort of final thought on it, in a very Jerry Springer style, is I think it has to be driven by men as well as in the equality stakes, because obviously women will want to fight their corner, but wages are a very difficult thing to talk about, because people don't, especially in the UK, we don't talk about how much we earn, do we? It's all very secretive, and some other countries are much more open about what they have and what they. In the UK, we don't. But I think men should. I think men should be driving for equality. If it's equality with their peers who they know get paid less than them. I know it's a very hard thing to do. And if you're an employer, I think it should be. You should drive to be equal pay. That's the least I think you could do.
Brilliant. Okay, so get in touch in the usual way if you want to. You can contact Damien at podcast@moneytothemasses.com, or you can email him directly, Damien@moneytothemasses.com, and he's on Twitter as well, @moneytothemasses with a number 2.
Yeah, also go and check out the videos, Ask Damien Fahy on Facebook and YouTube, which are getting a lot of attention, which is me answering reader questions, or viewer questions, listener questions, whatever you want to call them, in 2 minutes with a hip-hop overlay, which is, it is, we laugh, but that's what it is, which is very fun to do, and I think that's why people enjoy it, because it is just a bit different. And it may be getting near Christmas, but Andy and I don't ever... Well, I never give Andy a break, I think, is in fairness. And we're going to be doing another podcast before Christmas. So even though there's a week to go, you will hear us again. It'll be out on Christmas Eve, actually, a day earlier than normal. And then that will be the last one for this year. So make sure you listen out for that. Please keep spreading the word. We're getting lots of positive feedback about the podcast and what we're doing and everything with Money to the Masses. And until next week, Andy.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Until next time.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.